Hi all, welcome back to the Handbook. I'm Harv Nagra. I've got a friend that works in a service business. In this case, it's an agency that's run, well, let's just say not run very well, okay? They underprice everything, essentially making up a budget that's a fraction of what the competition charges. Overheads are not considered, so margins never make it into the equation. Naturally, projects are underquoted, hours balloon, and no one tracks time consistently enough to know where it's all going. It's a wonder they're still in business. You might be shocked to know that they're over 10 years old. Talk about being stuck in the chaotic era. But this isn't an isolated story. Across agencies and consultancies, the same themes crop up: overservicing, scope creep, utilization blind spots, and confusing busyness with real growth. That's what today's conversation is about, when you're scaling effort, not results. Our guest today is Michael Wark, fractional CFO, chartered accountant, and founder of Trimline, a fractional CFO firm. He recently ran a survey into the state of independent agencies in Australia, and the results shine a light on these exact challenges. And while the survey may have looked at agencies down under, you'll find relevance to all kinds of service businesses, and you'll hear similar patterns all over the world. From slim profit margins to the hidden costs of overservicing, to why you shouldn't confuse headcount with progress, Michael's going to tell us what to look for if you want to build true, sustainable growth. Let's get into it. Thanks for listening to The Handbook, the operations podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Scoro. If you're running an agency or consulting firm, you might live inside tools like Asana, Trello, or Jira. They're great for tasks and collaboration, but they're not built to run your business. So you bolt on more stuff and end up with a patchwork of a dozen tools. Everything's out of sync, and there's no single source of truth. Scoro is different. It's a modern PSA that combines the power of an all-in-one platform with a modern UX. From pipeline to projects to billing to reporting, you get one place to plan, deliver, and track your business. Leaders get the dashboards they need, delivery folks see the work and numbers that matter, and specialists just get a clean view of their tasks and time. Go to Scoro.com/demo to arrange a call and learn how Scoro can help take your business to the next level of maturity. And for the VIP treatment, tell them Harv sent you. Now, let's get to the podcast. Michael, welcome to the podcast. We're going to be covering a few different topics today, but before we dive in, what prompted you to run this survey of Aussie agencies, and what surprised you most about the results?
The motivation was that I wanted real data based on the people that I serve day to day. A lot of the people in the agency space who are thought leaders are often North American based or European based. And I'm like, I want to know what our local market's doing, which is a useful contrast when comparing to the US and the UK, just to see how we stack up. So that was the main motivation. And yeah, it was really interesting to do the results. That was our first year of doing it. And I'm going to try and do it every year moving forward now to see how the data changes over time.
I was flipping through the results. I think it's super useful to have localized data, but at the same time, challenges tend to be universal, right? We're all having trouble with similar kind of challenges anyway. One of the standout stats that shocked me, 37% of independent agencies are running under 10% profit. Why do you think profitability is such an ongoing challenge?
I think it's timing a little bit. So half of it's kind of business model coming out of COVID, where wages boomed, inflation went nuts around the world, interest rates were super low. And so the price of everything went up, and people, like there was staffing shortages, trying to find good talent. So the payroll or the wage cost went up. But at the same time, the market's gotten tougher, and the people that agencies are selling to are price sensitive, and that, everyone's starting to tighten their belt. And so there's not a lot of wiggle room with increasing the prices. So they kind of had to eat that margin of higher wage costs, higher rent, overhead, and all those kind of things, while still not being able to pass it on to their customers. So that was one big part. But I think, as you mentioned, the universal nature of challenges for service businesses. The second is that I think just overservicing is endemic across all my clients I see, everyone I speak to. And I think that's another key component of this, is that it's endemic because it's a beast that grows over time. It's like mold. It grows and constantly, and each month it compounds. And that's another key challenge of it.
We're going to be getting into more of that in a few moments, but I just wondered if you can run us through any other interesting stats that might have come up in that research.
The second stat that was super interesting was the headline, as you mentioned, 37% are less than 10% net profit, but
Mm-hmm.
also 69% of respondents were still planning to grow their team and hire. And that was really something that scared me a little bit. They're not profitable enough to actually grow the team. They're not keeping enough cash in their business. So they're flying really close to the sun and risking a lot, probably not even knowing that they're risking it. But that was the other really scary stat that I found, that people are looking to grow the team regardless, even though they're probably not in the right shape to be doing that.
I was reading something that you said, I think it was in the report, that you said you don't fix a sinking ship by adding more crew. Can you explain that a bit?
If you're unprofitable, adding more staff will make you less profitable. And I know that sounds obvious, but the actual challenge I see is that people are in a tricky spot and they're like, you know what? We need to sell like crazy to add more revenue, to solve a cash crunch, to solve a problem that we've got in the business. So we need more revenue and cash. So they sell new clients, but then the staff are already at capacity and burnt out and screaming for help. So then they're forced to make another hire. So it's just the endless jump between new client, new person, new client, new person, and they can't ever decouple those two things through efficiency. And so they're not profitable enough, but they're still adding people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we had a recent guest. She was a CFO as well, a fractional CFO. And she was saying that when you're running an inefficient business, you always feel like you need more people. But the reality is that if you were running in a really tight way, in control of your business, you would realize that you probably have too many, but you're just not resourcing and working as optimally as you could.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And we see it, I'm sure, as like fractional CFOs, I've got up to 20 clients at one time, right? So I've got a visibility over a wide snapshot of people. And like I see the efficient ones, and then I see the inefficient ones who just get started with me, and they're living in a different reality. Like the staff are like, we couldn't possibly add more clients to this list. And I'm like, the numbers are telling me that you have to add more clients and you need to find efficiencies. But that path between those two extremes is tough. It's hard. It involves a lot of investment, a lot of training, which is why it's hard to do, right? And that's why so many agencies are struggling. It's not easy.
absolutely. Sometimes we associate headcount growth as a sign of growth in the business. Do you think that's a fallacy?
I don't know if it's a fallacy, but headcount is often an ego metric for founders. It's one of the most common things that someone will ask you at a business networking event is like, oh, how big's your team? Or it's nice to throw that number out at dinner parties to show that you are a big company. So I think there's a certain incentive to have a bigger team, and that sometimes gets wrapped up in it. A little bit of that kind of ego. It's not the only driver, but I think that's a little bit part of it, of why people might want to carry more than they need to.
Absolutely. So, Michael, when a agency consultancy feels underwater, things that you might feel, the stretch team, you've got the overservicing, you've got the thin margins. If that's the case, where should leaders focus first instead of defaulting to hire to try to create more capacity, like we were just describing a moment ago? What would you say to somebody that's facing those challenges?
Look, like many challenges in life, one must look inward first, right? So I would start with the unit economics of your business and the unit economics of your retainers and your projects. Boil it down to understanding what you're actually charging clients, what you're delivering. Are those things in balance? Are your charge out rates properly? What are the hours you're doing? And get an understanding of the base building block of your entire business. And if that's broken, then you're building your house on sand and everything else will be hard. You'll be pushing shit uphill. There's an expression we have here in Australia. You'll be struggling from the get-go.
Yep.
So I'd start with the unit economics of those things. And then in terms of actioning it, I would increase the prices on any clients who aren't paying that proper rate that you should be. So people are often overservicing or underpricing, a combination of one or the other. So you need to hike the prices on those, your bottom 5 clients as a starting point. If they don't like that price, often they don't because they're just rusted on. You need to have enough clients in the pipeline to fill them and do a 1 in, 1 out, boot the worst 5, bring in 5 more that are super profitable, that have clear scope that you're going to make some money on, and then start building your way out of that as well. And obviously increasing the overall retainer number as well through efficiencies. So it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
a multi-pronged approach through increasing
Mm.
your prices on existing clients, increasing your prices on new clients that you sell in, whilst getting
Yeah.
more efficient.
That's a really good point. I think over time, as we grow and mature as well, we tend to hang on to clients because that's always a metric as well, right? You want the repeat business and stuff, but we tend to hang on to clients that come from a previous stage of our growth and stuff like that. And they struggle with the price rises and want to stick to their kind of legacy pricing and
Yeah.
ways of working. So it's always a challenge. So I think being okay with letting them go, as you described, is probably a really good shout.
And that's why people bring in a fractional CFO, because we're the adults in the room that have to give them this bad news. And then
Mhm.
it's not on them. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm telling you have to. So, we need,
Yeah.
and when I show them the math of it, it's like, you are volunteering, you are subsidizing your services. You're paying wages and not collecting enough money for those wages you're paying. Like it's money that should be in the founder's pocket. And once they truly see that, they're like, yeah, okay, we need to change this.
Mhm. All right. So another thing that your survey found was that almost half of agencies don't track utilization at all. So tell us about that. Why does flying blind on utilization, what does that do to the business?
I think the scariest part is that they don't
Mm.
know when they're going off track. Like you don't
Mhm.
have that little blinking red light on your dashboard saying, warning, warning, we're going off track here and we need to adjust. Especially on projects where there's big dollars amount and you need to deliver over a long period of time. That needs to be monitored regularly to make sure that the end result isn't too far off, because you can have massive losses that way. So I think that's probably the scariest part is not knowing when things are going to go wrong. And often
Mhm.
founders will have like a rule of thumb that they've kind of, or a gut instinct that they've worked by that's got them this far, but it doesn't scale, and it doesn't, you can't grow a business to 10 mil and beyond through that gut instinct. I think it
Mm.
works at a certain level, but it doesn't work the bigger you get.
Why is there a reluctance to kind of embrace time tracking, do you think?
Cultural, I think, part of it,
Mhm.
like Big Brother tracking me. Like I started as an auditor at Ernst & Young. I used to hate doing it. Every 15-minute increments, end of the day, I had to say what I'd done. So there's just
Mhm.
inertia of another task people have to do throughout the day, which is a bit of a pain.
Mhm.
I also don't think people educate their team as to why it's important. They think that they're
Mhm.
being tracked personally because they are not trusted. So it's a messaging thing too. When I help clients implement it, it's always about protecting them from burnout and making sure that our clients aren't taking advantage of it. So I always look at it through the lens of client profitability. How many dollars are
Mhm.
our clients giving us? How many hours are we spending on it? What's that average billable rate? Does that make sense at a really basic level? But the
Mhm.
pitch to staff, which is genuine, is, well, if you want to work a 4-day work week or you want to take time off, you want to be more efficient and get rewarded, we need to know where your time's going, and we need to have a metric to work out, yes, you can do that because everything lines up. But otherwise, it's just a
Mhm.
black box of unknowns.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, you want to make sure the projects you're selling are profitable, right? And I think that's a really important thing to say to people. It's not about tracking you, it's making sure that we're pricing things right and we're delivering things within
Yeah.
scope, because everyone feels burnt out when stuff goes over serviced. And the team will be expressing their frustration. And the only way for us to do anything about it is if we're tracking.
Yeah. And the other thing I see at the end of the year when they're like, you know what, that was a terrible year. I worked so hard. They're like, hey, can I have a
Mhm.
pay rise or a bonus because I worked so hard this
Yeah.
year? And the founder's like,
Mhm.
we literally don't have the money for it. Like, we're not even
Mhm.
profitable enough. We're sorry. So it's like there was no even upside for it. So that's when
Yeah.
you really need to fix it.
And there's like a lots of new and interesting, I shouldn't say new and interesting, but like there's a variety of ways you can track time as well now, right? It can be calendar based, it can be the timer and the manual timesheets and stuff like that. But there's a lot of like apps and stuff like you can use that allow people to track time in a way that works for them. So there's just really no excuse. I think you just have to get your team on board, and kind of communicating the reasons, like you said,
Yeah.
is the way to get about it.
What are your favorites in the time tracking world?
For what I do for myself, I do it calendar based. So I just kind of literally block out things I'm going to be working on, and then retroactively go and add things that I did work on, and then tag it. I use Scoro, obviously,
Yep.
and then I tag it to the project and stuff like that.
Yeah.
When I worked in my agency, what I loved is that we would resource our teams, our designers and developers, for example. And by doing that, it was effectively that their timesheets were automatically completed because this is what they were meant to be working on during those days. And all they had to do was validate that this is what I worked on.
Yep.
Or it took an extra 30 minutes or whatever. So that was really useful for them because they didn't have to do any of the manual stuff as well.
Yeah, I think that's
Right.
it. The devil's in the detail. Make it as easy as possible for people.
Absolutely. So scope creep came up again and again in your survey. And the thing about scope creep is that you only see the impact if you're tracking time, like we just said, right? And even then you have to be inclined to do something about it. Because I've been in that situation in my past agency where you track everything, but then it gets a bit muddled in terms of what you're doing when stuff is over service. Because then people start making excuses saying, oh yeah, that was our fault. And sometimes it is. And other times it's just like, oh, well, we can't ask the client for more budget. Who have you seen really in control of this, or how have you seen getting really in control of this?
I think it's always learned the hard way. So it's a trick for young players to deal with it. And then you've got to work out a system that works for you. And the best clients I've seen have super clear processes. They have them documented. They've trained the team on them. Like, it's doing the basics right, but it's also really hard to make the team follow that process and stick to it and get them to know when it's in and out of scope. So having that piece connected between not just having an SOP that gathers dust in a G drive, actually have a workflow management system where people are looking at the tasks, critically thinking, are we on track or off track? Is that out? And having a process for escalating it to suggest an upsell, a cross-sell, a bonus pack of extra hours, whatever way they want to deal with it. Yeah, that's a really important part of how the good players operate and try and protect against it. And also, the best ones I've seen have a second level person that it escalates to, and they have that conversation. Like, the technician doing the work wants to keep the client happy, which is natural.
Yeah.
And so it's really awkward for them to be saying yes to them all day and trying to keep them happy, but then also have that awkward conversation. So having another channel that comes in over the top for those conversations can help make it a little bit less awkward. But one of my favorite clients says that service businesses is just the art of expectation management. And as long as you've set the expectations up front properly, clearly, then when you remind them of those expectations later on, it shouldn't be a big deal because everyone was clear on what was in, what was out from the get-go.
Good client onboarding, right? So something that you've said is that you're not undercharging, you're over-servicing. Theme of the day. What do you mean by that?
That was born from a data point we pulled about the charge out rates. So here in Australia, the charge out rates were pretty good for industry standard, like around 200-ish, between 180 to 250 Australian dollars, which should be a fairly profitable business, but 37% were less than 10% net profit. So that there was something broken. Their charge out rate looked okay, but the net profit number said that something was broken. And then the only other thing that could really move the needle then is the amount of hours that they're throwing at each of those things. And so what I was trying to say with, if you're not undercharging, you're over servicing, maybe your retainer is priced correctly. It's $200 an hour times X number of hours, and that's the retainer. But if you're throwing twice the number of hours at it, your actual charge out rate in reality becomes $100. And so it's like your price looks okay, but you just didn't actually stick to the estimated hours. So it's just a pretty simple hours time price. And if one of them goes way over budget, it throws all the math out.
If we talk about kind of signals, what are signals that a business is running harder in place rather than actually moving forward? What kinds of things would you say are red flags?
I mean, the literally the most obvious is that they hit revenue ceilings, and they come to me and they're like, oh, we just can't push. We keep knocking on the door of 3 mil, and then something happens and we break, and we've been doing this for years. So like an actual glass ceiling of revenue is one. And that's generally because something in delivery or the process breaks and clients leave and client churn brings them back to earth, and then they make another run at it. Other ones are low profitability, cash runway, less than a month. They've got debts that they're struggling to keep up with, which is a bit of a drain on their cash flow. We already mentioned one, which is adding a new client means you have to hire to fill a gap for that client. You can't just scale clients and keep the same team. You don't have any leverage. You haven't found any leverage or efficiency with your existing team. And that's connected to the team pushing back, being burnt out, like team churn or client churn, obviously two key big ones too, where people are spinning their wheels. And that, I've had some clients where they had a horror year and they had like 30% churn over the year, and they were literally sprinting on the treadmill on sales. But at the end of the year, they were exhausted and in the same spot. So those are probably the key ones from a CFO lens that come to mind. Yeah. Do you see many in your world as well? What have you seen?
I mean, they all trigger me. everything you said, but the cash runway less than a month
Yeah.
just fills me with dread. And I remember a couple years ago, the UK was really struggling. And yeah, I remember those kind of conversations where it was just like, we need to make decisions on headcount if these sales don't come through or these invoices don't get paid. And it's just so uncomfortable. So yeah.
It is. And that's, I didn't mention it at the top about why everyone's struggling with profitability, but that's another key behavioral problem that's not spoken about enough, is that people are too slow to fire, because firing is hard. It's like getting efficient in operations. It's actually really hard. It takes a lot of work and a lot of investment. And firing people, it sucks. It hurts you as a human. It's every founder's worst day at work, and people don't do it quick enough. And so even though the numbers are telling them we need to, there's the human element where they pause doing it, and that erodes their cash flow and their profit for too long.
I think that's something that I had to learn as well, is that that does take a lot of maturity. I think that you do have to make those decisions for the business rather than letting emotions cloud or slow you down. And you were saying that earlier, that sometimes bringing in that outside voice can be really valuable, like yourself, a fractional CFO. And I think that is really valuable. And what you can learn from that, because often this outside expert doesn't have the relationships with these people and can just look at the facts. But the point is, even in-house, we have to learn those skills, because we're here to run a profitable business. And not doing so means that we might be collapsing, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely. Right? Look, I'll give you a bit of my hidden IP. Here's how I pitch it to founders, right? When we are in that situation, I come in. The first one I tell them is, hey, it's better having 25 people employed rather than holding on to this one extra person and the whole business goes broke. And then no one has a job because you held on too long for one or two key people. So let's keep the ship afloat and moving along, because the opposite is obviously worse for everybody. And then I don't see firing as like a negative thing. You're just releasing them back into the market to find a better suited job. And they will go on to new opportunities and new things. It's never literally anyone's last job. And so it always usually works out in the end. So they need to take that approach.
Really, really good advice. So we've been talking about the red flags, but I wanted to ask you, on the flip side, what are the kind of metrics or proof points that show that you are healthy, you're running things really well, and that you can scale?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few, and I look at them in unison. There's no one metric to rule them all. And I've got into lots of arguments on LinkedIn about this, but the key basic one is your total wage bill is taking up less than 50% of your revenue, and ideally 45%, but honestly, generally 50% is a good target. 45% I would say is elite. I don't see many clients in that range. Obviously your net profit's about 20% as well. That's great. That's probably a good place where you can still invest in a team member and your profit will only drop back down to 18%, 15%. So you're operating from a profitable place. They've got more than 3 months of cash runway. So they've got working capital in the business that they're not using for other things. So they've got a bit of a war chest to sustain some storms as we invest in scaling and growing. And they can invest in a website. They can invest in marketing. They've got the cash to do that. From a billable rate perspective, my rough rule of thumb there is whatever the person's hourly cost is, you should be marking it up 3.5 times to 4 times to get their charge out rate. So you're building in enough margin. So that's another really important one. Obviously, utilization on most team members is 75% ideally or above. And then across the whole team, it will drop a little bit because you've got management who aren't as billable. So those are some key ones that I look at regularly to know if this business is ready to scale. Do they have enough cash? Are they profitable enough? And then the other ones in terms of more sales focused, like if we're thinking scaling, is like, what's your pipeline like? Can we make hires in advance? Because we know you've got a pipeline coming, and that helps us make bolder decisions when we know they've got a clear look at what's coming ahead, and then we can get a bit more bold.
Good examples there. It's something that kind of made me laugh to myself when you were just talking about that, is that you were talking about kind of the healthy hourly rates and that kind of stuff, right? I've got an example. In the intro, I was talking about a friend of mine that works at this like really chaotic level 1 maturity business. And when he told me what their hourly rates were, I was shocked, because it was like double what my previous agency was charging. Yet these guys charge a fraction of the time that all the competition does. So everything is like ridiculously overserviced. So that's just a really weird vanity thing they're doing by saying, oh, our hourly rates are like super high. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know whose benefit that's for when they're charging like 5 hours to do everything and then panicking about profitability, right?
Yeah. I mean, and we're talking about staff previously. You're just setting your staff up to lose, aren't you? You're like, oh, you're over budget
Mm,
again. A lot of
yeah.
these profitability issues are won or lost on the pricing and quoting. And that's why I said,
Mhm.
if you're trying to get someone out of a sticky spot, go to your unit economics, unpack it, make sure that's locked in, and with realistic time estimates based on time tracking from previous clients. So you literally know actually in reality what it takes. And then you're
Mhm.
setting your staff clear goals because, I think there's a lot of challenges in business that pop up from ego things like our high charge out rate or our big
Mhm.
headcount or our nice office or the founder's leased European car going through the business, all types of things that
Mm,
sometimes
yeah.
sneak in. And as a CFO, that's my job to call them out.
Absolutely. So, Michael, you gave some really good examples of healthy proof points that your business is doing really well,
Mm.
right? But I was just wondering if you do come across businesses that are doing all those things well, like why? How did they get there? Did they bring in outside help, or the founders having like a really good financial background and stuff like that? Is there any interesting patterns there?
I think it's often on the founder. Of course, most businesses' success is. And it's the founders, if I think in my stable over the past 6 years, I've been doing this full time, helping as a fractional CFO for agencies. Founders have a growth mindset. They learn, they invest in consultants or specialists to help them improve their workflows and things like that. So, yeah, that
Hmm.
always learning, always growing approach. They attract good talent as well, which then further compounds this positive flywheel.
Hmm.
And I think those are the two anchor points of what the successful businesses do. And they learn their
Hmm.
lessons. They don't keep repeating their lessons. They're self aware enough to know their weak spots and they invest in those weak spots to get better bit by bit.
Hmm.
And often they have a good strategic view of what's going to move the needle and they focus on the right things. They don't just focus on the stuff that's maybe fun, but actually isn't going to get them the outcome they want.
The sad thing is that I think self-awareness comes with a bit of maturity and time and pain,
Mm.
unfortunately, before you get to that point. But like, if a business isn't doing that well, then they might struggle with the outside expertise as well. What would you say to somebody that's in that situation? It's like, we're already struggling. Can we really afford to bring in somebody from outside?
In those situations, like in my instance, if a business, cause this happens often, like people will reach out because they're like, we need cash, we're struggling, you're a CFO, you know how to do it.
Hmm.
Often I'll do a short-term project, right? We'll do a 1 or 2 month to get started and I'll just give them the playbook or I'll give them the first 3 months of the playbook and say, run this, come knock on my door once you've done it. And then the
Hmm.
founders who are really serious about taking that decisive action will do it and come back. And then we can take that next step. But often it's overwhelm when people are struggling, they're panicked, they're making decisions based out of fear. And so
Hmm.
I guess that's really hard to help someone who's in that mindset. And I've gotten better at saying no to those kind of clients because I get sucked into the vortex and I feel bad. I've had situations where you're trying to help them, but
Yeah.
the momentum was already swinging one way and I'm not a miracle worker. I can't just magically find 50K of sales in my back pocket. So yeah, it is a tricky spot, but
Hmm.
I try and simplify it down to the key things they need to do in the next steps to help them and try
Yeah.
and try and let them loose.
Yep. That's a good point that the project can be short term to just get some of those skills or some of those plans in action, right?
Absolutely. And I think the evolution of my coaching over the past 6 years, often when I first started, I was too focused on the one spreadsheet that would solve all their problems or the model that would prove that this would work or this fancy forecast. But I wasn't truly just focusing enough on diagnosing the real problem and then focusing on what the key step is to improve the outcome. So I'll give you an example. If someone's cash strapped and struggling, they don't have time to do a full client profitability analysis, get the time, look at retainers, see how it's trending over time. I'll just say, who are the pain in the ass bottom 3 clients and ask your team and they'll know. They'll know who the painful clients are. They'll know who the ones who are demanding and they're over servicing. I'm like, we already know who your bad eggs are. We literally don't need to run the data. Ask your team and reflect, take action on them first, fix them first, increase their prices or swap them out. And so it's in those tricky situations, it's just like, well, what's the outcome we would take if we ran all the fancy modeling and data that we could do? And then just focus on that outcome and the simple next step for that outcome.
Really, really good advice.
Mm.
So, Michael, from a finance and ops perspective, what do the best run service businesses do differently when it comes to balancing growth and profitability?
So if we're combining finance and ops, and that's where the magic happens, really, they have a clear picture of their future pipeline if we're thinking about growth. So they've got a clear view of future revenue dollars, but they've also got a clear picture of the people they need to deliver that revenue. And so they've got a way of working or reverse engineering their resourcing needs to plan the org chart as we grow, as we stair step it out. And that's based on data, and they can rely on that
Mm.
data because the team aren't over servicing. So it's a more measured and structured approach because they have those two key data points. And that was off the back of things we already spoke about, like clear processes for people to follow. They're looking at their data regularly, both time and finances, and they're changing and adjusting as needed. But they're looking at those kind of future-based things and then being able to make decisions with a bit of clarity. So I think those are the ones who make it up the scaling curve because they've got
Mhm.
those tools at their disposal.
Excellent. So we are coming up towards the end of the conversation. If you could give our listeners one piece of advice, whether it's from your research or your experience, something to act on tomorrow, what would it be?
Well, to summarize this pod, fire your painful clients who you know are costing you money. So that's probably the first one, or at least bring it up and have a look at your client profitability. And
Hmm.
that might help with your team burnout and team happiness and have a lot of positive flow on effects. But like holistically, if we're thinking about like my takeaways from our research, I would say, especially in the operations world, embrace the boring because what you do drives so much profit in the business. So like the processes, the workflows, the systems, get them world class and get your team to follow them, but don't over egg the sauce. Keep them as simple as possible. Break it down to the core tasks they need to do so people will actually follow them. Strip it back to the basics, and that's going to drive the efficiency in your business because you can train people. Staff turnover isn't as big a deal because you can train up the next person quicker and you've got those processes. And if you don't track time, obviously start. Whatever way you do it, that would be a
Absolutely.
key thing to action.
So, Michael, where should people find you and connect with you?
I'm most active on LinkedIn. So Michael Wark, WARK on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
Feel free to add me and I try and post 3 times a week there and the occasional video. And I'm
Hmm.
just trying to grow my YouTube channel, which has been a long-term project. I've got an embarrassingly low number of followers, but Michael Wark, fractional CFO on YouTube as well. Or if you just want to see
Excellent.
what Trimline does, you can go to Trimline, TRIMLANE.co, trimline.co, and you can check out what we offer there in terms of the CFO services.
Amazing. You've got a couple of really good resources on your website as well, ebooks and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. In the
Yep.
resources section, you can even download the report we've been talking about. And there's a book on
Yep.
scaling to 10 mil, everything I've learned. So there's a few things there.
Excellent. We'll put a link to your YouTube, first of all, and everything else in the episode notes as well. Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
What I loved about this conversation with Michael was how practical it was. One of my favorite lines of his is what we started off with. You don't fix a sinking ship by adding more crew. And Michael pointed out that headcount growth can be an ego metric and how hiring your way out of inefficiency is usually the wrong move. When we moved into pricing and quoting, he highlighted something that I think everyone in a professional services business can relate to. On paper, the hourly rates or the day rates look fine, but there's a lot of delusion or optimism around how long things are going to actually take to deliver. As a result of that, a huge amount of overservicing happens. Anyone who's felt pressure on pricing will recognize that pattern. We also dug into kind of the boring but essential stuff, tracking your time properly, knowing which clients are actually costing you money, having the courage to either reprice them or let them go, and understanding your unit economics. By the way, for anyone unclear, unit economics in this context means looking at what you charge for a project versus what it genuinely costs you to deliver once all the real hours are counted. It's the clearest way to see whether each piece of work is actually profitable. And finally, I really like Michael's point that great operations and finance aren't about heroics. They're about simple, clear processes that people actually follow. So, guys, one ask for me as we wrap up. Think of one agency or consultancy leader you know who's struggling with the numbers or worrying about profit across a project, across their team, or across the whole business. Someone in your organization or a friend at another firm. Send them this episode and tell them to subscribe to the Handbook so they've got company while they get their house in order. I'll be back with the next episode soon. Thank you so much for listening. This podcast is brought to you by Scoro, a platform designed for agencies and consultancies, which allows you to manage your projects, finances, and resources, all from one system. This is a platform I brought in at a previous workplace, which completely transformed the way we worked, and which I've recommended to clients of my own. You can sign up for a free trial on Scoro.com. That's Scoro.com. Or reach out to me, Harv Nagra, on LinkedIn if you'd like to hear about some of my experiences.